Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mitch Taco Bell. I'm your host for Tall Tales with Taco Bell. And I got to tell you, this is kind of fun. So, the first time I interviewed my dad, he started just telling some average sea stories of a Navy guy starting his career out. And so, I wanted to pick up with part two with my dad, John Bell, and some more big sea stories and tales from the rust picker. So the last time we left off with my dad, he was on a ship steaming full bore, 2,000 gallons an hour, trying to catch up to the refueling tanker, and the Commodore was not thinking correctly. Dad, did I get that straight?
You got it very straight. You don't uh, catch up with somebody using more fuel than you can get from them in that length of time. So we would have been a lot better to go slower, but he was Commodore. He's in charge. We had 8 ships, 500 yards apart, steaming at 30 knots, max speed, going through the Straits of Gibraltar. It's
Right.
not a very wide place. And the weather was bad. And I remember uh, the waves, when we would hit the wave going that speed, it would throw water completely over the bow. And all I could do is duck down so I wouldn't lose my vision and get my eyes full of salt water. And it was hard to keep station. Uh, why we didn't have an accident and one or more ships uh, get hit each other, I'll never know.
Which ship
Uh,
was this? Which ship was
this
it?
was the uh,
Was it the Wainwright? No,
no, this was back
McCaffrey.
to McCaffrey, DD 860, and the skipper had just come aboard. And he was my instructor at destroyer school. I had mentioned I was elected to go to destroyer school, and I was his only graduate. And so, as chief engineer, I should be down in the main control, making sure the engines ran well and everything was going down there. He ended up making me his sea detail OD, his formation steaming OD, his carrier OD. Uh, Coming into port, anything, I was his OD
Right.
until he could get to know his other people. He knew me. He had seen me ship handling down in Cuba on the school ship. So he knew a little bit about me, but he didn't know too much of his other people, and he hadn't had a chance to learn them at all. And he had some good people.
So that's the ship
But
right there, the McCaffrey.
McCaffrey, yes,
So
sir.
this destroyer is steaming. What year was that ship built?
That was built back in 44, uh, 45. McCaffrey was a colonel, lieutenant colonel, Marines, and was killed at Bougainville. And they named the ship for him. And uh, it had been a fairly good ship. I say a fairly good ship. It the criteria is when you meet your commitments. If you don't get somewhere and they sent you there, then you're not very good ship. But McCaffrey was getting where they needed to go each time. And uh, so we finally caught up with the tanker, slowed down, got some oil, and started riding a little more smoothly when we had oil. One of the things on a destroyer or any ship, you use your fuel, you're in a quandary of one or two things. If you have to get more fuel in, or you have to ballast your ship so it will be stable. And when you ballast your ship, you ballast it with salt water. And who wants to put salt water into their fuel supply? You don't put salt water in your gas tank, do you? Well,
No.
it's the same thing. As chief engineer, I never ballasted my tanks. I walked around that every time it came up and said, no way. Let's see if we can squeeze it out. We'll pump some tanks and do this, and the captain always bought what I had to say, and so we never salted down. But if you put salt water in, you had a way to get the salt water out, but it was a laborious process, and sometimes if you screwed up, you got a slug of salt water into the boiler, and the boiler stopped, and things don't work well if a steam isn't being made. So that was going into the Med. The Mediterranean was a U.S. lake, so to speak. I mean, we had a huge fleet, and it was all spit and polish. We were port and starboard. All units were port and starboard. And what does that mean? The ship was divided right down the middle. The engineers, the best engineer is in one section, and the second best engineer is in the other section. Same thing with gunners' mates. All the crew was divided up. So we could effectively go out if we got caught with half the crew ashore and they said get underway, we could effectively go out and fight the ship for a little while, not very
Right.
long because you'd run out of bodies and steaming the ship. But at least you could go out and respond to something in a quick answer. Now, the port and starboard uh, carried through all the time that you're in there. You had 6 month deployments to the Mediterranean, and that was standard. So, and some of the other crew lived on board, and people didn't live ashore, you lived on board. So, if they didn't happen to be ashore or they had come back to the ship before the midnight curfew, yeah, we had Cinderella Liberty, officers and enlisted men. You had to be
Really?
back on board at midnight. And part of the story I'll tell gets into that. Um,
Was that all the time that you were deployed, or was that
the
back at
six
home base
months,
as well?
the 6 months that you're there, that is what in the Med. When you go over to the Med, you have their set of rules,
Right.
and we wore. They wanted uh, officer watch shirts, the navy blue shirts. People from the academy had them, but we had to go out and buy these things to look sharp on the bridge. Instead of the normal uniform, you had to have blue pants and a blue watch shirt and your white officer's cap. So you were very alert to honors. Whoever was senior to you, you rendered honors to them. If they were senior, uh, junior to you, they rendered honors to you. Uh, all of those honors and the flag raising and everything, spit and polish. You didn't want to muck up, or you heard from the boss. And when we went to Turkey, I thought of a story to tell about Turkey. For I don't know how many weeks before we got to Turkey, every morning they told us, emphasize to your troops, to every one of them, you almost get in their face and say, look, Turkey is a different country, and they don't kowtow to Americans doing what they want to do, and you can go to jail in Turkey. Well, we did this brief every morning, every morning, every morning. We pull into Turkey. First day we get there, one of my engineers, oh, it had to be one of my engineers,
Yeah,
uh,
could have been a gun grape guy. Come on.
and I was command duty officer that day, and I had met this policeman who came aboard when we first pulled in, and he had left a card for the command duty officer and said, "Look, if any trouble, you have any trouble, please get in contact with me as fast as you can, because sometimes I have to do it very quickly before it gets to a point I can't do anything." And so what happens? One of our young men had a little bit too much ouzo, and he liked this rug. He was in a rug store, and he liked this rug, and he wanted to look at it in the light. Well, he might have really wanted to look at it in the light, or he might have had some other idea, but he stepped through the door of that shop. And once he stepped outside that door, he had stolen the rug in the Turkish law.
Oh,
And the owner yelled, "He stole my rug! He stole
and
my
is that
rug!"
is
And
that cut off your hand defense still in a Muslim country
oh,
back in
yeah.
those days?
Well, we didn't get to what the thing was going to be, but at any rate, I called and I luckily got that policeman.
Uh-huh.
And he got over to the jail before they had put him in prison, before we put our man in prison. They got over there and talked the shopkeeper, and he explained that he just went out to see it in the light and all this other stuff, and got him out of the going to prison, and he came aboard. He never went ashore again while he was in Turkey. I can tell you that. Uh, he might have
What'd you
gone
do?
ashore,
What'd you
but
guys do for the policeman? You give him a couple,
well,
zippos with the ship on it?
that was the interesting thing. This happened on a Saturday, and
Yeah.
on Sunday, the policeman they brought our man back aboard. The policeman did, and the captain said, "Find the ship's store officer and open the ship's store and give him anything he wants. I don't care what it is. Give it to him. Give it to him, and we will compensate the money later. But just don't even think about it. Give him anything he wants."
Smart cop.
And the policeman came in. And he looked. He had radios. He had all kinds of good stuff. And he selected a razor and 2 packs of razor blades. And that's what he said he wanted. And we said, "Well, okay, fine, you can have that. What else would you like?" He said, "That's all." Honest
Wow.
policeman, an honest
Yeah,
policeman. It really surprised us. But we didn't leave our man in a Turkish jail, and that was one of the things that is really scary. Uh, but you have to play the rules over there,
sure.
and we were always ready to go out and fight, and you had to worry in the Mediterranean, Israel. You had to worry Syria, all the countries that would cause trouble, flare up, and then you had to go calm that down and then and come back. Uh, we had our favorite ports in Italy were Naples,
Uh-huh.
and that was where we normally stayed. The destroyer tender was there, so we could get repairs done there. We could get fuel, and they had basically a supply outfit there that could help us. Um,
Is that the place that had the fat prostitute would sit on the wall and sing
oh
to you?
yes, you've reminded me.
I remember that.
Uh, there was a officers club, the NATO officers club, and you would take a taxi up there. Uh, you could actually take a bus. My
Uh-huh.
wife and I took. She wanted to try the bus, and we get on a bus, and they had their chickens with them and all kinds of things, live chickens. They carrying them on the bus for dinner. But she just wanted to see the people, and so we took the bus up and then took a taxi back. We weren't going to come back through Naples in the bus then. But just before you got to the officers club, there were a couple of Fiats,
Mhm.
and there was some women uh, sitting on the wall, and my wife says to me, whispered, "What's this?" And I said, "Oh, honey, this is the infamous Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall location." She said, "What?" And I said, "Oh, I thought I had told you about Humpty Dumpty sitting on a wall." She was a rather large woman, I would say 300, 400 pounds. She was a large lady. She wore uh, boots and short dress, and she ran the prostitutes. And I said, "Honey, just don't look too hard, but check out those fiats as we walked by. And of course, there was action between men and women going on in those fiats as we walked by to go to the Osses Club. It was there. And so Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, and my wife is always fascinated to talk to people, and she wanted to talk to Humpty. No, no, let's leave this alone. Let's go in the Oak Club and have a dinner, good dinner, and come out and go get a
That was
taxi and
years.
come
That
back.
was years later when you were on the San Diego, though, right?
Well,
That would have been the Med Cruise when you were
that's right.
on the
That's
San
right.
Diego.
That's on San Diego. I
Because
get,
if you're on the
she,
McCaffrey, you were a young single
no,
guy still.
that's right. I was still single.
You were in the back of the
Got the
Fiat with
story all.
Humpty Dumpty.
Yeah, got the. No, I didn't get in the back seat with Humpty Dumpty, but I
She could have fit
got
in the
the
back
ship's
seat,
crew.
right?
Yeah,
Uh,
got the ships crossed up, and that happens easy enough when you're on the same different ship going the same place. Uh,
yeah.
but at any rate, uh, we let's see
You
where
had an
else.
interesting story with a young lady and some sailors.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you reminded me of that. That is a story to behold. I had said you never know what young sailors can do, and the chiefs and the senior enlisted people. They're very smart and genius people, and not that they're trying to do anything to you, but they do their job. They do it well, and we had three young, very young sailors who were on board ship. Two of them were my engineers. One was the eye seaman. The other one was in the engineering department, and then a fire controlman.
Right.
And they met this very attractive young lady. This was Marseille, France. And they met this young lady there.
At church, of
And,
course, right?
hmm?
At church, of course,
Oh,
where
yes, I'm sure.
where they
But
met
they
her.
met this young lady, and uh, she told them how she lived there with her folks, but she really hated that place, and she wanted to come home. And they said, "Oh, well, we're leaving in 2 weeks to go back to the States. We'll be going back to Mayport, Florida, in 2 weeks." Well, that planted a seed in those four young people, girl and three boys, and that seed was they would sneak her aboard the ship and feed her and keep her on board for the 2 weeks that it took to steam back to the States. And she'd get off the ship and she'd be in the United States.
How
Well,
do they think they're gonna? I mean, the crew hot rack down there probably, where they
yeah,
had tight
yeah,
quarters.
okay. Here is how, and it took some masterful thinking on this.
Right.
First off, we had bunk checks. When people went ashore, I said before, we had Cinderella Liberty. Everybody had to be back aboard at midnight, including us. Everybody came back aboard, and you reported to the captain. Everybody's aboard. All us, or you just say everybody's aboard. So um, they had a sign-off list for the enlisted people to sign off when they went ashore, and when they came back, they checked they'd come back. Well, these three young lads signed out, went ashore, stayed about an hour, and then they rented a room. And one guy took his uniform off and sat there in the room in his skivvies. And they got the one that was closest to the young lady. She put on the uniform. It was pouring down rain. I was standing 2 feet away from her or 3 feet away from her when she came aboard. I was standing meeting. I was required to meet everybody coming aboard. Pouring down rain, nothing matter, but I was standing right there. But she had a hat down, collar pulled up. She went right by me, all three of
You
them.
didn't smell her. You didn't smell the perfume or
Nah, she
anything,
didn't
huh?
have any perfume on. I think I would have caught on that, but She was smart enough to even have no perfume to let that go. So she got aboard. So then they stayed about an hour, and then they said to their buddies, "Well, we just came back to get some more money. We're going to go back ashore. We got fun over there." And so they went back ashore, and when they did, they checked three people ashore, but only two of them went. So,
Oh.
so that's how they sneaked it by us. And the people on watch were good people. I had a good watch, and I was amazed that they did this to us. They got those young men got it past us, but they didn't catch it. The rain, when I say it was raining, it was pouring to a point that sometimes we had to stop running the whaleboat back and forth because of
So
water
rough.
filling it and too rough. So they went back ashore. They um, got the third lad, had the uniform in a bundle. He put it on, came back, so they had all three of them on board, plus her. Now, where did she stay?
Yeah, that's
One
a
of
good
them was a
question.
fire. One was a fire controlman, and we had a space that in the fire control space uh, had some secret material in it, and it normally was not manned unless we were at general quarters and battle stations. And so he had the key to it. He put her in. They got her a slop jar for taking care of certain things. They sneaked her food up out of the galley and fed her meals.
Yeah, but
What
wait
they
a
could.
minute. How did they get her down to this fire control room? Aren't there other people around?
Well, it happens
Oh,
to be the fire control room is across from the captain's cabin. It was up in Ossa's country, and it
what?
wasn't that many people. And he had the key, and the only way she got caught was the chief master at arms. This young man did not know the chief master at arms had a key to that room. And the chief master at arms decided to go in there for check something. And when he went in, he saw her, and he caught up with her. And we spent 8 hours trying to get her name. She wouldn't give us her name.
She was an American
Nothing.
girl.
Well, we knew enough English. She wasn't French.
Uh-huh.
So we kept on and kept on, and finally, uh, one of the guys got through to her and said, sometime you got to tell us your name and what's the deal? Are you
Did
you
did she
live
have
here?
a did she have a passport? She didn't have any ID or
Nothing,
nothing?
nothing, nothing, nothing.
Really? And this
And
was
so,
coming
and
out of
she was
West St.
going to she was going to go to the United States without a passport. That was going to be interesting too. But uh, we finally found out about 6 p.m. that night that her mother was lived there in Marseille with her dad, who was in the Navy. Okay, that's the
Uh-huh.
first part of the story that came out. The second part of the story was her father was a four-striper captain, same as a colonel, Marine Corps, Army,
Right.
and he was chief of staff for the three-star admiral that ran Sixth Fleet. He was the chief of staff for him. And this young girl didn't like France, and she ran away from home and
Oh,
was thinking she could get back to the States. She didn't think it all out, but she was starting on the way. And once we got the name, I remember we were not about to get on the radio and tell Sixth Fleet what was going on. We got
right.
a flashing light message, and we very carefully designed them. Uh, could we? Do you have Captain Umpty Ump on board? Yes. Could you get him to the light, please? That's unusual. A little destroyer asked the captain, big captain, to come to the light, flashing light. So we got to the flashing light, and question: do you have a daughter here in France? Uh, and the answer came back, yes. And I could read 10 words of flashing light. I had to learn that in destroyer school, and I'm sitting there
Right.
reading this because it was going to cook my you know what too. And he said, yes. Do you know where she is? Oh, she's at home with her mother. Oh, sorry about that. She's on the board ship with us.
Oh God, how
Currently,
far out?
currently, currently in the captain's cabin with a guard outside the door. So, oh, then the answer came back. So apparently the captain called his wife and he found out the daughter had run away and left a note or something for mom and
Oh
did
God.
not have her passport. And next thing we got was put four boilers on the line and proceed back to Marseille.
And how far
For
were you out from
oh, two
leaving?
days. 2 days. We
2
had
days. How
gone
are
a
you
little
gonna
ways.
catch up with the fleet after that?
Well, we'll find out where they are and catch up or rendezvous. But anyway, we went back and we got there at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I tell you, not one guy was asleep on that ship. Everybody on that ship was up to see this babe. They wanted to see it. And she was not a bad looking young lady.
Uh-huh.
And the salvation for those three young men was they they were just trying to be nice to her, and they had no intentions of anything you want to think about. If they had, they'd probably still be in jail with this girl. I can't remember if she was 16 or 18, but she was young enough that they knew to leave her alone, and they did. But they were just trying to help her out, and they came very close to doing that. Now, we've had a number of reunions and two of those guys are my men. And their senior petty officer, one day I was saying something about, I'd love to talk to him about it, but I've never said anything. And he looked and he says, oh, he says, uh, uh, don't talk about that at all to those men because he said their wives don't know that they were involved in this. And this is 40 years later. They don't know they were involved. He says you can get them in a lot of trouble if you talk about
Oh
this.
my God.
I had
So what
written the
happened?
story. I had written the story, and it was in the ship's book, but the wives never looked at that ship's book to see. And I
Well,
don't know if the
whatever
two
happened
I seen.
whatever happened to those guys, captain's mask and
All
reduction in
three, they
rank?
had
What?
captain's mast, busted in rank, pay cuts. They didn't go ashore until we started back to the states, and they had some time uh, that they paid for that even after we got back to the states. But at that
Oh,
point, they were all young guys. They weren't married, so they just paid their time, paid their dues. But yeah, yeah, you can never tell what can happen
that's pretty damn funny. So
and
you
how they
eventually
got
steamed
around us
and
and
caught
how
up.
they got around us. Yeah.
Well, I
So
bet that didn't happen twice. Guys were like,
no,
"Yeah."
no, we tightened up the rule book, but if people involved on the ship are complicit with this, they could get around you, and particularly the ship wasn't expecting their crewmates to do something like that to them.
Yeah.
You don't think they would do it, and particularly young guys, they wouldn't do anything like that. But they just got intrigued by this young lady, and they were going to help her get back to the United States.
That is so funny.
I don't
So
know
you
what would happen when they got back to the States and she got off the ship and no passport, although they normally don't check things. Now, oh, last item was when we pulled back into Marseille. Her mother was standing on the pier at the bow, and I said, oh, because if the French all were there, immigration, the whole shooting match. If this girl did something wrong or we did something wrong, we're in deep trouble. Well, her mother, they had diplomatic passports, which are red, not the green that
right.
everybody else has. They're now blue, but back in those days, green. And her mother had it in her hand, and when we walked up, hugged her daughter, and handed her a passport, slipped it right to her. And so when the daughter started off the ship, she opened her passport. It didn't have a signature for leaving, but half the time diplomatic passports don't. So the guy had to sort of ignore that. She didn't have a stamp out, but she had a passport, her
Yeah.
picture and a passport. So that's how
Oh
we.
my.
And I was due to make lieutenant, and I had said to myself, well, forget that. I've had the course on this. I don't think I'll make lieutenant.
That
Well,
was a good career.
okay, yeah, a real career buster. I don't know, and never will, because I wasn't about to ask. The admiral either had a daughter that was wild or had done something. I'm guessing. I have no idea. But the admiral and a four striper captain must have had some long, serious talks and decided this young lady may have learned enough lesson and to stay with her parents and to make sure she promised that she would, etc. And it all quieted down. It just nothing filtered down on our captain, therefore nothing filtered down on me.
Wow.
I was expecting to be a Lieutenant JG and retire, not retire, but get out of the Navy. Uh,
If
but
this was this day and age, Dad, I have a feeling there's no room for grace or mistakes. You would have been hammered. The captain would have been hammered. Those guys
oh,
would have been hammered.
definitely,
Yeah, that's the end
definitely.
of your short, very short career. You could have gone back to med school. I could have been my dad, the Dr. Bell, Senior
Yeah,
Taco Dr. Bell.
yeah, yes, yes.
So you
Well,
guys did the med cruise and you came back to
we were
Gainesville
stationed in Mayport, Florida,
or Mayport. Okay.
Jacksonville, yeah, Mayport, and had some yard work done, and then have started a story about chiefs and people,
Oh yeah,
and I'd
yeah,
like to continue one
yeah.
in Charleston. Uh, I had gone to postgraduate school, came back to Charleston, and I was training officer there in Charleston Fleet Training Center. And I was expecting a new chief sonarman to be arriving, and I was there in the building, and they said, "Oh, your new chief is over in the office waiting for you." And so I go over to the office, and I walk in, and his desk is to the left, and mine is to the right. And I look, and I see a pink service jacket sitting on my desk. And I'm wondering, that's strange. It's certainly not mine. And I look and I see it's the chief's. And about that time, chief walked in, sharp looking guy, dressed neatly. Um, and so shook hands. He said, "Well, I thought, Mr. Bell, I thought I would start with my service record first because it's not many chiefs you're going to have with service record like mine." And
You're thinking, oh,
so,
Medal of Honor, or what? Navy
yeah, I
bronze.
was wondering exactly. This was before Vietnam was just starting to go. I ended up getting orders to Vietnam there when I was there. I got
Uh-huh.
orders, and that chief, by the way, got the orders. He was on duty, got the orders, put them in his safe until after Christmas, and then he handed them to me. He says, "I know you knew they were coming, but I wasn't about to give you orders to Vietnam on Christmas."
Oh man,
It
what
was
a nice
nice.
guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was. Okay, so I said to him, "Well, you want to tell me a little bit about your service record or service or what's going on?" And he said, "Well, it's a long story, but let me see if I can keep it fairly short. Uh, I have a general court martial, and that is the biggest court martial you can get. It's uh, they have one that's a one officer court martial, and another one that's five officer court martial, and this is 12 officer. If you're in deep trouble, you get a general court martial. Well,
Right.
he got a general court martial, and I said, "What did you get a general court martial for?" He said, "Well, that's the long story, but I'll just give it to you this way. When I came here, I bought a house over in James Island in Charleston, and I was one of the few enlisted people over there, the chiefs. Most were officers, and we look around, and we don't have a playground at the school. We don't have any swing sets or anything like that. And I was there in salvage there on the naval base, and I see all this pipe. It would be perfect to build a swing set and a seesaw and all this other stuff. And so I just went in and checked it out. Used the Army truck from the Citadel the major got, and checked all this stuff out. Signed for it, and took it, and we built a swing set for the school. There was some bicycles there, and he says, "Well, I fixed those, and what I needed to buy, I bought like a new wheel. It'd been run over. I bought the brand new wheel for it, and got those and gave them to an orphanage, and um, well, there was some generators, and I said, "Well, generators? What do you mean?" And he says, we lost the lights over in our subdevelopment quite a bit, and I saw all these nice generators sitting up in salvage, just sitting there, nobody claiming them. So I went up and signed for a number of generators, and got the wire, and I basically wired my neighborhood with emergency lighting. I had enough generators, I could generate enough electricity to at least have emergency lights. You could cut on
Wow.
refrigerators. Very ingenious, chief. Very ingenious, chief. And so somebody got a little bothered by the fact the generators and the lights, they had them, but this bad other guy didn't have them, and so he turned my chief in for getting these generators from the Navy and putting them into that subdevelopment.
And they didn't work, and so he fixed them up
Fixed
anyway.
them.
I'm
Yes.
guessing because if the
Yes.
stuff's in Duomo, it quote doesn't work, or DMRO, whatever
Yeah.
you call it.
He
Yeah.
he got everything going. And so they uh, had a first off looked to investigate, and then they decided he had just done some awful things, and so they had a general court martial, and he had all the paperwork. Everything was perfect. Everything he had done was fine
Right.
by the rules, but it was out of government use. It was being used by people in the neighborhood, not in the base. Um, Maybe if he had hooked up some people on base, it would have made it better. But at at any rate, they court-martialed him, and when it was all over with, they really couldn't find anything that bad that he had done, but they knew he'd done something bad, and
Right.
he had to be punished. And so I said, well, what did they do with all this stuff? The cash register, the bicycles, the swing sets, the generators. He said when it was all over with, they took bulldozers and dug in the Navy base, dug enough holes to take everything and just take the bulldozer and push it all into the hole and push dirt over it and pack it down with the bulldozers. The bicycles that the orphanage had, the cash register the young kids had learned how to count on underneath the ground.
Right.
And then you start thinking, what does the government think sometimes? But that was the decision. They couldn't leave it out. They couldn't let him keep using it. He had enough ingenuity to get it and hook it up. But
And so what ended up happening to him? His career.
basically, he was told that he would never go past E7. He had a chance of going to E8, E9. So he would retire at E7. He made chief, and he would get the payment for chief, but he would never go further.
Right.
And they would allow him to retire, so they'd let him stay in long enough to retire. So he had probably 3 or 4 years to go.
Wow.
And I mean, his service was exemplary. When you looked, everything was fine.
Right.
But some of the things that will happen in the Navy.
Jeez.
Okay, now I was thinking, and I haven't been watching the time at all, but uh, I then went to a third ship, which was USS San Diego, another chief engineer job. We were also a Mediterranean ship. We were the supply ship. We spent time in Naples, but we also would go to ships and to ports in the Mediterranean and give them supplies as we
Did you
roamed
guys give
around.
gas to other ships?
We had the capability, but they usually used the tanker because our pumps were small compared to the huge pumps the tankers had. We were there. Basically, we had to use the transfer pumps to transfer gas. It was called auxiliary gasser, fuel refueler. But uh, we went to Naples. We flew over. I took my wife Mary. We got it right, the right ship here, and I get on as chief engineer, and the first thing I see in my incoming box the next day is a study to put women on board the ship and to birth them in their bathrooms and all this other thing. And I said, "Oh, that chief engineer put that thing back in the basket and waited to me to relieve him and leave the ship, and it got floated to me the next day." And so, but it was a fairly easy task because there was only one compartment that had two heads, two bathrooms that we could divide one of them up for women and the other one for the men, and still be able to get the complement of people that we
And what year
needed.
was this?
That was ooh, dates slip out. I think that one was in the
75?
six. No, that was in the 60s. Uh, yeah,
No, no, no. You're screwing
no,
up now
60s. No,
because
okay.
you skipped Vietnam.
Oh yeah, 67. Okay, that was 70, 73, 73.
Yeah, that was
You're
73.
okay.
So you skipped
Okay.
Vietnam. All right, let's
Sorry
go
about
back.
that.
Yeah, let's go back. Yeah, I think we missed the Wainwright too.
Uh, yes, we sort of missed two of his ships, but uh, okay. Let's get to Vietnam. I got the orders. You were 1 year old, and Susan was born. She was 6 weeks old when I left for Vietnam, but she was born right as I was leaving. Uh, I was sent over to be advisor to the South Vietnamese Navy. We have 120 men at a naval base, several officers, and we would patrol out in the oceans to make sure they didn't bring stuff down south uh, past the DMZ.
Right.
Uh,
Out of Da
and the
Nang.
out down well from the Quaviette is right at the DMZ, and so they would bring it all the way down to the south end of Vietnam if they could get by with it. But they had junks that would go out, motorized junks that would go out and inspect them, and then they decided to put the swift boats in, and then the Coast Guard cutters. Now, swift boats were 50 footers built here for oil rig. So uh, they also decided they needed something a little more seaworthy in bad weather. So they got the 82-foot Coast Guard cutters, which were a lot more stable. And um, so between the two, they would have the areas covered unless the weather got extremely bad.
Right.
Um, I got to Da Nang. I went into uh, a hotel that I couldn't believe it. It had a guard outside sleeping, Vietnamese. We had no weapons. We were issued no weapons to go over there. And I said, well, I'm liable to get my throat cut tonight, first night. I get in to see the boss, the captain, and he said, well, the fellow that you were going to relieve got sick. They had to relieve him with somebody else. You will now go where he is located. And so all the training, I took 13 weeks of training, all of that went by the board, and I became the assistant coastal surveillance center officer. And it was basically administrative. Uh, but we had the OPCON of the swift boats and Coast Guard cutters did the reporting, administrative work on them. They did their own uh, personnel and like fitness reports and all. They did their own stuff. We were just
You're
uh,
the higher headquarters that would read John
higher
Kerry's
headquarters.
awards. John Kerry's awards for himself.
Oh boy, yeah. Well, they did pass some of those up through. John Kerry came into Da Nang, but this was after I had left. Um, I was very lucky at Da Nang. Now that I look back, books I've read, uh, I was in probably one of the safer places. That coastal group that I was supposed to go to got overrun twice in the latter stages of the war in the 70s, right at the
Mhm.
end. Uh, Tanks, a whole shooting match would overrun that. There was no way they could defend themselves against it. The best thing was get in their junks and run. Um, but uh, Da Nang wasn't bad. I only I don't tell war stories, but the night of Tet, I got a call to go pick up a top secret message. I knew it was Tet. They said it would be a lot of firing in the air, but that's the way the Vietnamese celebrated Tet. So I got the call about 11:30 that night, and instead of going out to get somebody to ride with me, I just decided to go over, jump in a jeep, go over and get the message and come back. And you don't put a weapon in your vehicle, wide open jeep, if you don't have anybody with you, because somebody can reach in as you're driving in the crowd, reach in and get your weapon, shoot you with your own weapon.
Not if you
So
have a 45 on your hip.
I had a 45 here. I carried
Yeah.
a shoulder holster 45,
What kind of
and
rifle did
half
you carry?
I had a carbine because the M16 wouldn't fire more than 3 rounds. I had a shotgun, um, and I liked the carbine. That
Yeah,
was the
that's a good
weapon.
shooting rifle, 30-30 or 30
Yeah,
caliber. Yeah.
would use that. But I got down to Third Math, the Marine headquarters. That's where the message center was. And I looked and I said, I have just enough time to go over and pick that message up and ride the ferry back and jump in my Jeep and go back. And
Hmm.
I did, and did not realize had I gone down through downtown Da Nang, they were actually attacking the VC and North Vietnamese are actually attacking in that end, west end of Da Nang, and I would have ridden right into it. So good Lord was looking at me for that one. And we didn't really know what was happening until the next morning. Then the reports got out as to what they had taken and what they had uh, gone into, and up in Way and the whole shooting match, all of the
Right.
entire I Corps uh,
What about your speeding
attacks.
ticket? When did you get your speeding ticket?
Oh. You can remember lots of things for me. Um, when I was supposed to go on R&R, my orders got fouled up. Mother was already on the plane to Hawaii, so I had to get my orders straight, and I kept calling, kept trying to get it straight, and I said, I just got to drive over there. So I asked the boss if I could go. He said, go take care of it. So I jumped in the Jeep, and I mean, I was in a hurry, and
Uh-huh.
I had a lot to get done anyway. And So as I came up on third math, there was a curve, and I passed 12 Jeeps, trucks, rickshaws, whatever was on the road with 2 or 4 wheels. I
Uh-huh.
passed them all. I threw it in second, and I went by them all, and I got to a curve, and I saw somebody up on the side of the road, but I didn't think of what that was because I had never seen it there before. Uh, but it was a young Marine with a radar set.
What? Yeah.
Yes, right at Third Math headquarters. Now, I found that ticket coming down here, and I have it framed in my office now. But I had slowed down. Luckily, I had it in second. I had slowed down, so I didn't get the speeding ticket, but I got it for passing on a curve.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and
I actually
sort of
tracked that Marine down. I tracked that Marine down years ago, but he never replied
never
to me.
responded.
Now
Yeah,
he
it would
never
have been
responded.
fun. It would have been fun. But that, luckily, I got my orders straight. I was 282nd on 289 getting on the plane. That's how close I didn't get to Hawaii.
Wow.
That close. I'm glad I went over there and the ticket behang. But I asked the fella after he gave me the ticket, I looked at him and I said, he was, Corporal PFC. I'm a lieutenant. And I said, what happens if I get another ticket? And he looked at me and very seriously said, well, sir, he says, they send you home. And man, I I hit the gas on that thing and I threw rocks all over him I said, I want another ticket. I want another ticket. He just smiled and ignored me throwing rocks from the wheels. But, yeah.
Oh, you know what would have happened? They would have yanked your license to drive over there, and then you would have been without a vehicle. Somebody
I
would have
didn't.
to drive you.
Oh yes, that would be fun. Okay, that was Vietnam.
Yeah, but what about SEER school? Going, you went to language school, right? Monterey.
Oh yes,
So you had to
no,
do
actually language school was at uh,
Coronado.
the Coronado at the base there.
Okay, so
Uh,
you did Vietnamese
13
language
weeks.
training.
Hmm?
Yeah, you did Vietnamese
Vietnamese, yeah.
language training. Then you had
13
to go to
weeks of
SEER
that.
school.
I had to go to a week of SEER school. I very fortunate to have a friend who was a A4 pilot who'd been through 3 times, and
Is
I
that
flew up
Larry?
to Lemoore, Larry Dupler, and I flew up to Lemoore, and I said, "What's the skinny on SEER?" He said, "Oh, that's a piece of cake." And he says, "I'm gonna tell you the way to do it, and you won't have any problem." And it was amazing. You sort of moved away from these guys, but without making it noticeable when you were there, so that they wouldn't peg you as the guy trying to run away from them and get you and beat you and beat you and beat you. But if you just sort of glide away and you had to keep your eyes open where they were, the
Uh,
guards, and uh, they had slapped a pilot 2 weeks before I got there. He had flinched and they slapped him in the ear and it broke his eardrum, and so he couldn't fly for 6 months or more.
oh,
And so they decided they weren't going to slap any more POWs. They made us pull rocks around and ammo buckets. And you put you in wooden boxes and beat on it all night. And
this
it
is back
just,
before all of our POWs came back. So what kind of intel did they do? Did they do it sort of? I mean, they knew the Japanese POWs and they knew German POWs. How did they kind of treat the guys as POWs? I mean, was it in a flavor of Asian because you're going to Vietnam? Whereas
flavor of Asian, they acted Asian, but they had people who had escaped from prison camps,
mhm.
Vietnam, Korea. They, so the
Yep.
Asian mentality, they knew, and uh, uh, they tried to flavor it. We didn't have waterboarding. That didn't exist in my time frame. Um, this was 67, 68. So I was there from uh, January, February of 67. I got in country May of 67 and got home back in May of 68.
So
Um,
you were gone when Susan was born.
no, Susan was born. I took
March
leave.
67.
I took leave.
Oh,
I
that's
went to my
right.
ONC, and he was a good guy who had been a Mustang who had been an enlisted man. And I said, look, I got a daughter that's going to be born. I have not seen her. Uh, I've got the money. I've got the leave. Can I cut the last week of Vietnamese school, which is a skit, which I have no interest in, and go see her? And he says, you make sure you get back. And I just said, I will get back. And I did. So
Wow.
I got a chance to see her. And the night I thought we would have a wonderful steak dinner and a wonderful evening, she cried all night unless we had her right in between us. She just knew how to take care of her mom and dad at a very early age. But
Good old Suze.
yes, and we probably have covered enough of war stories. I will tell one more thing. I thought I would do extra effort to um, do some spotter plane missions while I was there.
Hmm.
And so I asked if I could fly spotter plane missions, and they said, fine, go ahead. And so on my own time, I would go out and we would go up and down the coast. That way I could see uh, what the patrols were patrolling was looking like, what our guys were doing, and
Hmm.
what the Vietnamese were doing, and South Vietnamese if they were doing things. And so I decided I needed to tell my people that I needed to tell what I was doing. So I wrote my uncle Cliff, who was my best man at the wedding, and also Mary's dad, separate letters, sent them like to business addresses, and said, look, I just want you to know I'm flying these spotter plane missions, just want to increase the war effort, and hopefully nothing will ever happen. But if it does, you can explain to people it was something I wanted to do, and I just volunteered and did it.
You idiot.
And yeah, well, Tet, three observers got hit the first day, wounded, and couldn't fly for a while. And so I went up and said, I've got 13 missions now, and I would like to get on flying status. I wasn't getting paid for it. Uh,
Yeah.
all I wanted to get from doing plane missions was the air medal. I needed 20 flights, 20 medals, 20 missions to get an air medal. And as a surface officer, to have an air medal, oh, aviators would just go ape for me having an air medal that I could prove it too and have the paperwork right there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
20
Yeah.
missions. So I had 13 missions, and they called Saigon to get me on it. And as they were looking things up, they happened to notice that I was top secret control officer and I was picking up all the top secret messages for the command. I didn't even think about it. Nothing can happen to you when you're flying a spotter plane mission,
Yeah.
except we were flying it in some places I could have something happen. And
Right.
if a plane engine quit, it could get. If it was out in the ocean, maybe a swift boat could pick you up. But it was not smart for me to have done it and thinking. And they said, nope, you can't do it. So the boss man says, well, good, like to, but can't. So that ended my spotter plane
And what were your accommodations like over there in Da Nang?
Da
Did you go to the
Nang,
club? You had a club, right? You had to go
we
hang your
had we
45 up
had
on a
a
peg or something?
okay. We had two things. One was the old French club, nice place that you could get a fancier dinner, and you they didn't want you to be armed in any of these places and have an altercation. So you just had wooden pegs that you could hang your weapons up outside the dining room. And I wondered, well, will it be there when I get back? And it was always there when I got back. You forget it, go back the next day, it'll still be there. Nobody
Really?
touched anybody else's weapon, and I carried mine uh, because of riding a jeep and the top secret messages. I talked to the armorer, and I basically ended up having the 45 loaded and in a half cock position, which meant it didn't take much to fire it.
Right.
And I'll tell the story about a doc I told, a good Irishman, I told about this, and he put his into half cock position, put it under the seat of his pickup truck, and proceeded to go in and drink a few too many drinks and go out to get his 45 out from under the seat of the pickup truck. And the hammer caught on the wire, that the seat adjustment wire, and
Right.
it fired, and
Oh,
it went through one side and through the other side, and missed his married life barely, but he stood for the last 2.5 months of his tour in Vietnam. He couldn't sit very comfortably.
wow, they kept him, huh?
Oh yeah,
Got him
they
patched
kept
up?
him there. Yeah, all I had
Wow.
to do is put two corks in. No, they just took care of the wounds and made sure they didn't get infected. And he was there. He was a doc. They needed doctors. They weren't going to let him go for shooting himself in the ass.
They give him a
Not only
Purple Heart.
one, but both
Pur
cheeks.
they give him Purple Heart from, Cloverfield or
Well,
something when
let
they
me tell you, when he had his birthday farewell party, we got a lot of purple ribbon and a heart that was about this big. And
uh
then his birthday party presented him with a purple asshole instead of a purple heart. We did a purple
Nice,
asshole. And
nice.
oh yeah, yeah. And he took it well because he could give you shots that would wear you out. I mean, you had back in
Yeah,
those
nice.
days. Uh, Back in those days, you got a gamma globulin shot, a huge needle, huge thing, and
Right.
you had to get it once a month. But he said to me, well, actually, if you don't take it once a week, you're probably not effective. And I said, well, if I had to take that thing once a week, forget it. I don't take it at all. But yeah, good old Doc, good Irishman.
Did you ever
And he
catch up
took,
with him after Vietnam?
no, 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 didn't see him after that. He probably is practicing and can tell some stories about that one, but I'm sure he doesn't carry 45 that way anymore after this
Yeah, I
that
bet.
time. After Vietnam, I went immediately to a couple of months training and immediately to a DLG guided missile cruiser, the Wainwright, and it became a CG cruiser.
Is that
Uh,
it right there?
uh,
28?
28, the Wainwright. And
Okay.
we were sitting outside of Haiphong. Hanoi was just a bit inland. We were sitting out. We had a buoy that we put out. We would only go off station to get fuel or food, and we stayed within 5 miles of that buoy. And we were the tack-in for the Gulf of Tonkin. Everybody airplane came up, locked onto our tack-in, and then they would go bomb, do what they wanted to do. And so we were the important step. And why they didn't take us out, I don't know. I never
Huh.
realized we could have built a Texas Tower down there. I don't know if they'd have come down and tried to take that out or not. But
What about the
Uh,
story about the SR-71?
uh, well, I'm not sure which that story. What
The
I
story
found
about the
out.
radar. Turn the radar off.
Oh yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, I can't tell. There's two things on the SR-71. I found out when I was picking up top secret messages in Da Nang that I described earlier. That actually was dealing with SR-71, and that's as much as I had a need to know at the time. So I had no idea what it was all about, and I'm not going to go into it now. I do now know what it's all about, but
Well, I'm
the
sure that's all declassified. So what was it about? Was it the POW stuff? What were they looking
no,
for?
basically the SR-71 would go down Ho Chi Minh Trail and see who, where, what, and how much, and then they would know whether to order B-52 bombing down the trail, or if where to do the bombing. Um, the lost my train of thought there for a second. Let's see.
So the message came in about shut your radars off
Oh
while you're out
yes,
there.
when we
I
were
remember
there
this.
and the SR-71 would be coming, they would tell us exactly. We would see the tanker and the SR-71 sitting east of us there over the ocean, refueling. And then you would see a momentary break, and then you'd see the 71, and it would start towards us, and it would go over us. One sweep of the radar, we would stop sweeping. No range, no, we didn't, in case they were able to break our codes, the way we had things coded, then they could detect exactly the speed, exactly the course, everything,
Yeah.
altitude, you name it. So we quit blank. We just you see a dot on the screen, and it would be on the far end, 500 miles, center, 500 miles on the other side, or 250, whichever they would have, and that's the SR-71. After it built up its speed, it was gone,
But there
absolutely
was a
gone.
time that you didn't turn it off. I know. I remember you joking about that with somebody. I heard that as a kid. You didn't turn the radar off. You were supposed to. You were in there and you're like, nah, leave it on. Let's see how fast he's going. And you clocked it. Do you remember that?
Don't remember that one. Maybe you've
Oh,
got a story I don't remember, and not
trying to
that
get
I'm
you in
trying to
trouble.
deliberately remember. I don't think I would have done that, but you tell some tall stories,
Yeah, I told tall tales, but I think it was
tall
a couple
tales.
drinks at happy hour at the house when you were talking about that stuff with some of the guys.
Yeah,
But I
whatever.
mean, what people don't know, living as a Navy brat, I always thought that every kid ought to live like that because when you came back after we went to DC and then we moved down to Little Creek Amphibious Base. Those were the best years any kid could ever have. I mean, we had full reign of the base. We just get on our bicycles and go ride all over the base, go to the pool, go to the beach, go to the PX, go to the Basket Robbins, go to the movie theater, 25 cents a movie. Um, that was the greatest times a kid could ever have. If I could write a story about it that would be interesting, I'd like to do that. But that really, our little quarters there at D-21 at NAB Amphibious Base was a great time. So
You had a lot of fun there. I know that.
we had a lot of
Um,
fun. Yeah.
um, I look back at my note there, and I did want to talk a little bit about the San Diego. Go back for a second on the San Diego, the supply
Okay.
ship AFS-6. I was on it for 30 months, and I realized things started to re-happen. Things that happened when I was first there now are happening again. Same thing. So it told me, hey, it's time to let somebody else take this job. And my assistant actually came back as chief engineer, and he knew that ship like the back of his hand. But when I got to the ship, and I told you that they wanted uh, to set it up for women, so I got that study done and was fine. In the meantime, my wife flies in, and Air Italia had lost her luggage, and so she says, "I got no clothes," and this was at night, really too late to go buying anything at the stores because they were closed. So I'm looking to see my travel uh, underwear was nylon because you wash and wear. So I'm saying, well, I don't know if it'll fit, but you'll have to try this for a night, whatever it is that you can borrow from me. But the she had brought some cookies, and the next day she came down to where the ship, the boat would take people out to the ship. And
Uh-huh.
Mary never worried about rank or people or any of that stuff. And she looks and she says, "Oh, that's an aviator." So
No,
she
no,
goes,
no. That's the story.
"No,
She had one of the young Lieutenant JG wives in tow,
yeah,
and that lady was looking up to mom because her husband was a lieutenant commander, the old salty guy, and so she must have been the old salty wife, knows all this Navy stuff.
oh yes, okay." So you added that in, and so here Mary goes up to this fella and says, uh, "My husband is John Bell over on the San Diego. Could you possibly get these cookies over to him?" She thought she was giving them to an aviator. She was giving them
Because
to
he had eagles, right? He flies
he
an
had
aviator.
eagles, yes. Well,
Mhm.
she was giving them to the Commodore, who was four striper, um, who she didn't know I'd had a pretty good argument with the day before because we were there and
Oh,
they
my.
wanted us to furnish electricity to the ship while they were overhauling themselves. We that was what we were sent up to. We had three big generators, and so we were supposed to furnish electricity to them
To the base.
to their ship, and they had all kinds of repair equipment on board. So I mean, big lathes and foundry and you name it. So they had a lot of electricity requirements. Well, we had a shore power breaker that you uh, would do 1600 amps, and
Wow.
it was a 1600 amps. That was a bit of juice, and it was protected. If something exceeded, it would pop, and therefore protect everything, the generators, everything else. And he presented the fact that they needed more juice and that we should just connect directly electricity from our generators through our switchboards to his switchboard. No breaker, no protection in between, nothing. So if something went wrong, it would basically melt down our bus bars. Well, I had been in ship's construction and had found out our ship, there were no spares to that switchboard, absolutely no spares. They didn't build, they had seven ships and they built seven sets of switchboards and they didn't build a spare. They thought they'd save money. And
Is there
so,
an animal down there jumping on
yes,
that thing?
the
It's
cat is,
rocking you.
yeah, the cat is playing with me and licking me and all this other good stuff. But at any rate, I had a real go round with him,
Uh,
and he wasn't the right guy to give to the cookies. But we smoothed it up. The next day, it was fine. Uh, he realized that she didn't know anything about it. But the kinds of things that you can go into when you're in engineering. The main switchboard that we were just talking about,
Hey, do me a
that
favor,
cat needs
move that cat away from
go,
the.
go, 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 go. Come on, go, go.
You're
I
bouncing all over the place. You look
I
like
know.
you're going through turbulence.
All right, I'm gonna have to see if I can get the cat without getting hurt. All right, go, 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 go.
Uh,
Any rate, um, sometimes try to remember where you were talking.
yeah, so
Oh,
there's your ship right there.
the ship is there. Um,
It's a big ship.
they, yeah, the design, they put the sewage lines over top of the switchboard. All the places they could have run the sewage lines, they put it right over the main switchboards. And the sewage lines, they had decided to save money. They didn't need copper nickel. Copper nickel can handle salt water.
Hmm.
They put in cast iron or um, galvanized or something, galvanized piping. And so it would clog up, and then you'd have to cut it apart, fix it, put it back together. But over top of a switchboard live, when you're putting juice in it, is not the nicest thing to do. Um, that was one of the things that we finally got done is replaced all of the piping. It was giving us so much trouble with copper nickel because copper nickel was
And so this
where
guy
it should
wanted
have
you to
been
pump.
first.
Yeah, but this guy wanted you to pump juice from your generators directly to him with no
Directly.
breaker. And what did you said, "Here, yeah, go ahead, sign this waiver because I know I can't get another spare. Our ship will be down forever,
Well, actually,
and you're
I
responsible."
didn't say to him. I said to our captain, Captain, we cannot do this because if he has no thing, he's just saying that's what he wants. If we do it, we wipe our ship out. We have no replacements, and you're going to have to CAS rep it and say this ship will never go anywhere again unless somebody takes a switchboard out of their ship and it was in a shipyard or something, and then they emergency build a switchboard. So
Yeah.
it's on you as captain. So my advice is we do not do that trip.
And that's what
And
you do as chief engineer, right?
yeah, normally you don't have to go against a four striper. And our captain was fairly new, so um, he uh, did listen though, and went with us, and that was it. Uh, they decided the Navy decided, oh, we need a compactor for all the cardboard boxes that go aboard that ship. We need a compactor to compact them, and then we can get rid of them. And so we got this compactor. They forgot two things that people have Cokes and they have leftover Coke in it, and they put that so then when you squash all these Cokes and you don't have a bin built up or plastic bags that can hold all of that as you crush it, you're going to have Coke all over the place and have to be washing down Coke. That was number one. And then we got the first one and we put it on a dolly truck and we throw it over the side. And we said, great, let's just mark it. And we were going towards the east side of the Mediterranean. And so in a day's time, we turned around and started back. There was that bale of cardboard still floating. And right where we had marked it down, where it hadn't really floated anywhere, it just sat there. So we figured out, all right, if we compacted enough of these, the submarine could just follow us anywhere we went because they'd have all these nice uh, cardboard monsters sitting behind us. So then the captain said, "Well, let's see if we can sink it." So we break out all the small arms and make sure nobody's around, and they start shooting it with the small arms. Didn't bust it, didn't phase it. All that stuff gotten compacted so beautifully. It was just still floating along.
Yeah.
And he got frustrated. He says, "All right, break out the 3-inch 50s. This is 75 millimeter howitzers." So we opened fire with 3-inch 50 howitzers, and we did tear up the bales a little bit. They still didn't sink. So my evaluation of that is, unless you figure out how to get rid of it, unless you're going to carry it until you get ashore, because if you look at Walmart, you'll see these bales that have gotten done there. And
Yeah.
okay, that was one of the things. Now on that ship, there's two things I wanted to talk about. Boats. We had 6 boats.
Uh-huh.
We
I
had
see
we
some little
had
John boats there
hmm?
in this
We
picture.
had
I can
two.
see.
Yeah, we had two 26-foot whale boats. They were for the air. Uh, uh, when we had air ops, if they had a problem, they were sort of online for
Mhm.
those. And we had two uh, nicer boats that were. One was the captain's gig, which only the captain and who he invited rode in,
Uh-huh.
and the officer's boat, which was similar but not as fancy. And then we had two personnel boats that the crew ran back and forth in. And they never got exercise. They never got run because it was too much trouble to move the ship away from the pier or to get it out at anchorage and let the boats work like they'd be working in the med. And no matter what I did, boats, I don't own a boat now. I hate boats. I had more trouble. We worked on our boats and worked on them and worked on them, and we got to the med and we went into Greece. And I went ashore for dinner, and I was at dinner for 1 hour and 20 minutes, and I came back to the pier to get a boat back to the ship. And I saw a whale boat there, and I said, "Well, where are all the boats?" He said, "That's the only boat we have working." I said, "Out of 6?" He says, "Yeah, one blew the shaft, one blew the turbocharger, one hit the pier and is leaking." It just went through a litany of all the problems. And I'm saying, "Oh my God, this is the way I start my med cruise." Uh, I don't know if I'll ever
So
get
did you
through
have to go to the
boats.
captain's quarters? I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
didn't mean to do it. My guys were stupid. We
No,
gotta get this fixed.
we put good people on it. We put a lot of effort on it. The suppliers have gave us every spare part we wanted. But like I said, if you don't run them, you don't exercise them,
Sure.
you don't always keep your boats working and working well. Um, I just thought of something that uh, goes into aviation for a minute.
Mhm.
Um, My position when we gave supplies to ships was up on deck where all the winches were, and if a problem occurred, I'd go up and tell the captain what it was and what it would take to fix it, or what we had to do to get the goods from our ship to the other ship, and that was
You're
all.
like
That
you're
was
like
the
Mr.
bottom line.
You're like Mr. Scotty.
Uh,
Yeah, you're like
okay.
Scotty on Star Trek.
Well, I
Engineer,
was
chief engineer.
always working with that. And one night, just at dark, I'm standing there. It was getting cooler. I think I had on a foul weather jacket, might have had my leather jacket on. I had a leather jacket, aviator's jacket, as a department head on the ship. Non-aviator, but had one, was given that by the supplier. So, um, H-46 helicopter took off 4,000-pound load,
Off the back
and
of the ship there.
yeah, it had a deck, that hangar deck that they took off from, and two hangars that they maintain them in. He took off, and I won't give the exact detail whether it was transmission or engine, but one of them failed, and with 4,000 pounds on it, he wasn't going to get airborne. He immediately jettisoned the load, which took that off, but by that time, uh, because of losing engine or transmission, he was already headed downward, and he actually hit the water. And there's a 46 has an open gate in the back,
Mm-hmm.
and water started pouring into the helicopter. And the pilot was a football player at the academy, and he said he had just had his third daughter born, and he says, if I don't get this thing flown out of here, I'm going to die in this thing, because a lot of people have died in 46s. They go down. They don't.
46
They
is the
don't.
transmissions and stuff are on top, so it's real top heavy and it
Mm,
flips over right away. Yeah,
yep.
you get caught and it starts sinking, you won't get out.
You don't get out. Well, he hit the water. The crewman in the back says, it's waist deep back here, and he some way got his collective. He got his night vision enough. He figured out where the horizon was, and he started hovering with what power he had, and then slowly raised it up and kept letting the water trickle out the back or
Uh-huh.
pour, whatever it did to get out of the back, and actually pick it up and slap it back on the deck of the ship. So
Oh,
he saved 4 crew members, and he saved a helicopter. Now it had salt water in it, but they started a corrosion control immediately. They used half of my water that I made on the ship. But what was I going to say? I mean, a
so your
helicopter.
showers went from 3 minutes to
Yeah,
30
we
seconds.
we we gave them a lot of water on washing it down and flushing it, but then they put corrosion control, and then they had to get enough engines collected and transmissions to change everything out so they could actually fly it over to the ship that was going to North Carolina, where the overhaul facility was, and they could get it uh, overhauled. And because they caught it as fast as they did, we, like I
Wow.
saved a helicopter and saved 4 crew members.
I hope
That
you got
ship
an air I
had,
hope you got an air medal for that.
I don't know what he would have gotten on that. I just know that um,
It's, probably flying
it was
array had.
phenomenal, and they actually changed the NATOPS. It had said if you hit the water, you're goner, and they changed it to say you can fly it out if you work at it. I don't know if they didn't say it that way, but
Yeah.
there has been one who's flown it out.
Yep, yep,
So,
yep. Well, Dad, I tell you what, that's an hour and a half. So this is
oh, I
part
didn't
2
realize
of
it was
Talk
gone.
with John Bell, and, I think we'll cut it off here, and we'll have a part 3 because we'll have some more stories.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Well, you give Mom a hug and you relax. Have a great day. Play with the cat. Play with your stray cat down there.
Yeah,
That's Ray Charles, the blind cat.
the blind.
And listen, Dad, it's been fun, and I hope
Oh, it's been
everybody out there
fun. Enjoy it.
enjoys tall tales with an old rust picker Navy guy. So I'm going to pull you off, and I'll say goodbye, and we'll wrap this up for part dos. All right. Thanks, Dad.
All
Love
right.
you. Bye bye. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed some tall tales with Taco Senior, and we're going to continue this. We might have a part 3 here that we'll work on. Just kind of fun tales, everyday life of a guy on a ship in his career. My dad spent 21 years in the Navy. I spent 29 years total in the Marines. So between us, 50 years. Pretty damn proud of our service. My uncle was a F-14 Rio with the world famous Pukin Dogs, VF 143 out of Oceania. And so as a kid growing up, I spent many nights where my mom's brother, Bruce, would drive over in his Porsche and hang out, and we'll probably tell some tales about that. And then, oh God, my grandfather was a surgeon in Guadalcanal and Okinawa and Korea as well. Um, in World War II. So just very naval centric family. Enjoy our service. and I hope you enjoyed those tall tales. You guys have a great night. Until I see you again, adios, hasta luego, sa wiedersehen, tschüss, shesheni, au revoir, domo arigato gozaimasu, tano shinde kudasai, ciao, rivedici, tashakur, assalamu alaikum, mahalo, das vidanya, nastrovia, dovijanya. God, I got too many. Anyway, we'll see you all next time. Take care.